Activation and discretion warning. This episode contains explicit and graphic descriptions of attempted suicide, physical assault, and adult content situations, including sexual assault and rape. Discretionary caution and action is required. This episode is not for children. Please use extreme self-care in listening to this episode and seek immediate help through the National Suicide Hotline by dialing 988 if you are emotionally activated or triggered by the content of this episode. Or if you are activated and need help from the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, dedicated to providing a safe space for victims and survivors to tell their rape or sexual assault experience as a step in their personal healing journey or in helping others on their journey. This platform is devoted to explaining what it means to be trauma-informed and how important it is for each of us to know and understand the critical aspect of treating victims and survivors with a non-blaming attitude of belief, support, and empathy. This is episode 107, and this week I'm proud and honored to bring you a powerful, impactful guest who is not only a survivor of rape and sexual assault, but is also a licensed clinical therapist. Kevin Taylor is with us on this episode, and he is extremely open and honest about the impact his sexual assault experiences have on him, and also about the ongoing bearing his healing has on his work. This is an exceptionally powerful episode, one that will hopefully inspire you to help normalize this conversation. Let's get to it, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Kevin. Kevin Taylor, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. It's an honor to have you with me. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
And for my audience, I just will give you a little bit of background. The way I know Kevin is through a mutual friend that I met when I was working for the Army several years ago. And he contacted me recently via an email and said, you need to contact Kevin Taylor. He's got a story about being sexually assaulted, but he's also in the healing process, and he feels like he's ready to talk about this on your show. And I think he'd be a great guest. So I did. I reached out to Kevin. He's very positive about this experience of being on the show. And I welcome you again and commend you for the courage and fortitude that you have to be here. Kevin, I'd like to start by having you tell us about yourself. Can you give us some background on what you have done for the past several years and what you do now and what's going on in your life?
Right now, I'm a licensed professional counselor. What led me to this was being in therapy for now about 20 years and having some of my providers tell me that I'd make a great therapist someday, which I thought was bullshit. But it left a thing in the back of my mind. And once my abuse came up within myself, all the memories and everything, I wasn't able to function. I wasn't able to go out and do much at all. And then I got the opportunity to go to school, and I'm sure I'll do it. I'll try. It so happened that it was through the VA. The VA contracted with me. Okay, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a counselor. They're like, okay, well, we'll try and put you through school. We just need you to do one class. They gave me a core class that I needed to take, and then I got to pick a class as an elective. And then when I had to pick another class, VA required 2 classes. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, the school required 1 class and a freshman class. So I went from not being able to really get out of my house to being a full-time student with 15 credit hours. And
wow.
And so I was like, okay, I'll try a semester and see what happens. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
I made it through the first semester. So went through the second and got my confidence back. I liked it. It got me out of the house. It got me to be social again. Once I got through with my bachelor's, I'm getting my master's. I needed a master's to get into counseling anyway.
Right.
I did the same thing. I just started, and it was just a really good fit for me, and it still seems to be. It doesn't feel like work except for doing notes.
Yeah. That's quite the story. And what an amazing approach to healing. I really am intrigued by what you went through and the impact that starting school had on your healing process. It's very interesting, but also commendable. It's a lot of strength needed to do that kind of thing. Just going through school takes a lot of strength, patience, and lots of work. So you've been a therapist now for how long?
I've been licensed just recently, fully licensed anyway. I had a provisional license up until a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Had to do a bunch of hours in order to get that. It's a process.
Yeah,
It's
it
quite
is.
a process.
Yeah.
It took me about 3.5 years out of my master's program. We actually start in the program with our practicum, which you're thrown out into the world. They're like, throw you to the wolves.
Yeah.
You're a counselor now. You get to practice with people, and you're pretty much working from then on. It's just your hours become more and more important through your program. Once you graduate, you still have more hours to do in order to get your full license.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was referring to when I said it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of grind. It takes some fortitude to do that.
Just about 10 years in the making since my first undergrad class.
Yeah. Kevin, what are you able to tell us about your sexual assault experience?
When I was 3 or 4, my mom had met a man who eventually became her husband. They didn't get married till I was 7. But he turned out to be really violent and mentally abusive, more so mentally abusive, but he'd have his moments. There were times when the physical happened. This physical and mental abuse, they carried on until I left the house my senior year of high school. When I was 8 years old, happened the end of summer into the fall. My mom's husband, something happened, and he, in the middle of the night, beat the shit out of her. I had heard the noise, and I came up and I saw him beating her unconscious, and I thought she was dead. I don't know how long I stood there. I just remember running back to my bed and thinking that I was next. Pretty soon after that, the police showed up. They took him. I don't think anybody heard me when I asked, but the first thing I said to the police was, is she dead or is she still alive? And I think that went over their heads. They took me to go see that she was okay. She wasn't okay. I saw her face. She looked like Rocky, eyes all swollen over, blood, just like that. And even if I close my eyes right now and think about it, I can still see her face. That was super impactful. After that took place, my mom and us left him for a while. I don't know if he was in jail for that time or not. There was no talking about any of this stuff, but we eventually went back to having him in our lives. But by that time, there was a guy in the neighborhood, a man. He took me under his wing, and I'd hang out with him. My mom didn't get home until 6 o'clock, Monday through Thursday. It was like that pretty much my whole life. It was better to spend time with this man versus going home to being terrified and the threat of something happening to me. So I've tried contacting my mom's husband. They're still married. And finally telling him that I see him as the catalyst of everything else that I went through, because he's the one I see as making me a vulnerable kid. To go from either getting yelled at or played with mentally or getting hit versus getting hugs, getting to watch TV, getting to just play around and be a kid as much as I knew what being a kid was, and having some type of male figure that just seemed like they cared. This man, he, like I've been talking about, he used all that to groom me. And one day he just started touching me, and that progressed into other things, but there was nothing ever painful with him. I'm trying to say it in a way that's not too shocking. I think a lot of survivors feel a little bit similar to what I'm feeling right now. I don't want to scare anybody. I think this kind of goes to show how, okay, I'm a professional. Okay, I have an education. Okay, I've been victimized and I'm in my 40s now, and I've told my story enough times that I know my story instead of trying to grasp or whatever. It's been presented before from myself to friends to whoever, and it still is a difficult thing to talk about every single time for other survivors not to feel so alone in, I should be better at this by now, or something like that. You can get more comfortable with it, but is it ever super comfortable? For me, not so much. But it's important. It's important to me for survivors not to feel as though they are alone. I believe there's something super valuable in meeting other survivors in person, not just the anonymous emails, chats, things like that. At some point, meeting another survivor is like a whole other level of being able to relate to someone that actually relates to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, this man groomed me. As I said, there wasn't anything painful at first. I thought it was weird, but I didn't know, of course, being 8 years old. It went into being 9 years old. But it was told to me by him that this is what real dads do with their sons, which I've heard that from survivors before. Or even if it is someone's father, they say something like that. It's a guy thing. It's our thing. Something to make it make sense to a kid, even though it doesn't make sense. I didn't know any better. I just liked the attention. I hate saying it, but some of it felt good, even though I didn't know what I was feeling. It is very hard to separate that I was being harmed while I was having these feelings where I felt cared about. It really fucks with your head. This man, he was just like the opposite of my mom's husband. After I left his place, it wasn't every day, but after I left his place, I had to go home and deal with the bullshit going on at home. Well, there's one day where I was with this man and he took me to a park. And this is where I start getting hesitant stuff I need to say. It's hard to say, but I feel for myself that I need to get through this type of thing and do it over and over and over, because there are other guys that have experienced similar. We all have our own individual stories. If nobody said to one of your listeners that it doesn't matter, you matter, what happened to you mattered, and what you're going through right now matters. But the experience itself, there are some survivors that don't believe that they went through a whole lot. Like, it wasn't as bad as so-and-so, or it could have been worse.
Right.
And then there's others, I've heard this a few times too from some very respected people. There's others that are, my story is too unbelievable, or it's too shocking, or something. It's too much. I've learned that our stories are what they are. They're our stories. Each of them have an importance, and each of them have impacted at least one person, and that one person is you. Through that, you impact the people around you by sharing your story or just sharing yourself as a person. I'm kind of going off tangent. Maybe that's a little bit of distraction.
I think this
Yeah,
is,
that's
I
great.
mean, it falls in line with what it means to be traumatized. It falls in line with what it means to heal. And it also falls in line with what it means to share your story with others who are also trying to decide whether or not they want to share their story.
Yeah. I put it to clients and other survivors that I've come across that it's important to tell your story to someone that you trust at least one time, just to somebody, because it's not your secret. This stuff is not my secret. So why do I hesitate so much? It's embarrassment, it's shame, and it's fear of, what is somebody going to think about me?
Yeah.
I mean, it might be a little surprising, but I've been working where I'm working over 3 years, and I work among a number of counselors, and I've never disclosed that work. It's not really because of a fear. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it just hasn't been time yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly not because I'm embarrassed about what they might think about me or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully in the next couple of months, I'll disclose.
Yeah.
So this man, he took me to a park. At that park, he walked me over to another man and they talked for a moment. And he turned around and he walked away. He didn't say bye or anything other than you're going with him. And that was the last time I saw him. This other man took me with him, and he drove me to a house. Still don't know where it is. I didn't get to see where we were going. He had me down at the floorboard of the front seat. And when we got to this house, the garage door closed and he took me out. He brought me inside the house and straight downstairs to the basement. And there were other men there, all wearing masks. And there are just things they did that probably that's as close as I get to talking about stuff that they did. But it did happen, I want to say routinely. I'm not sure, but between me and one of my psychologists and stuff, we estimated it was maybe once every 6 or so weeks. And that happened over the course of 3 years. There were, I think, might be able to guess how I know without seeing their faces. They were not always the same men, which I guess is considered being trafficked, which that's a new term for myself to be using. Like I said, it happened over the course of about 3 years. Everything's kind of iffy, our memories, trying to place things and using some type of waypoints to figure out what happened when. But I remember because I was in middle school during most of that. So that would have been from 9 years old to 12-ish. Just one day, I don't remember if that part of my abuse had stopped or if it was still continuing. I think it had stopped, but have no clue how or why, which is something I wish I could remember. But I remember just needing to tell someone, and I just held it in so long, and I was so scared of who to go to. If you were to see my middle school, it is right across the street from a Catholic church. So you might know where this is going. I grew up in this church. I don't know if I was sitting, I think I was sitting on the curb looking at my middle school and looking at the church, trying to figure out which one I went to, because I really, really, really wanted to tell one of my wrestling coaches. I was a wrestler. I guess I'm still a wrestler. But I was so afraid of what he would say if he would tell the other boys. All these irrational, well, they were rational fears. They were rational for a kid going through what I was going through.
Sure.
So all these fears, comparing that, trying to make the logical choice of there's my coach with all these variables of what could happen. or the priest at my church, where you grow up in a Catholic church or probably any church. And as a kid, that top person can't do anything wrong. They're perfect. And so I made the logical choice and I went over, and just had tears in my eyes walking down past the pews. He saw me and came up to me and asked me what's wrong, and just said I needed to talk to him, and put his arm around me. He's like, just talks the way that I want to say, like, stereotypical priests do. But he he comforted me and said things were going to be okay. I don't know how much I told him, but he was just, things are going to be okay, and had me come back to talk to him. And and he started grooming me in a different way, and with some spiritual type of use attached with, he was helping me, and these are the ways he needs to help me. And in a lot of ways, it was replacing what happened to me by doing it to me himself. So another area of being such a mind fuck. I mean, there was a lot of spiritual stuff intertwined. I'm not a religious person. I was raised to be. So at the time as a kid, it's how much I wanted to believe in God. He used that to motivate me because I had to be willing to, for anything to help. I had to be willing. I couldn't fight against it. Yeah. There was Bible reading and reciting prayers while he was doing stuff. So that went on, and then I don't remember how that stopped. I just know that when I was in high school, I wasn't around it anymore. I pretty much stayed away from that church, and high school had its own problems because, again, I was still getting hit, yelled at. Home was violent until I left, leaving early, leaving before 18, as just because I couldn't take it anymore. I made it through to graduate. I have really good friends. I had really good friends in high school. My friend that introduced us, he was pinnacle in me surviving, even though I didn't tell him at the time what I had been through.
Kevin,
it was just very hard.
Yeah, this has been a lot. Do you want to take a break?
Well, I'm okay.
Can I ask a couple of questions that
Sure.
might help the audience put some things in context? And I don't like asking real pointed, closed-ended questions when I'm in situations like this, but some things have come up in my mind logistically. This neighbor that initially started grooming you and then sexually assaulting you, that took you to the park, and you said you never saw him again.
No.
But did he leave the area, or was he still a neighbor?
He would have still been a neighbor. He wasn't on my block. It was between school and my home.
So he wasn't someone you saw on a regular basis then after that?
Yeah.
And then this new person that he took you to and who drove you to this house, help us understand how it was that the abuse continued in terms of how you got from home to that house. Was he picking you up regularly? Was he ordering you to show back up? What was the methodology in keeping you
There,
in that?
there's quite a bit of speculating because of my memory.
Okay. Yeah.
I've thought before that maybe I had to make a phone call periodically or something to like check in, like I was going to get in trouble if I didn't.
I see.
He also would pick me up between school and home. And it was always only him that would pick me up. And I've never been a car person, but if I saw a car like that, I think I would recognize it. It would freak me out. But all these years later, I doubt I'd see a car from the 80s.
Yeah. And then one more question. I would like for you to go back to your free narrative of telling what you can and what you're able to in the way you want to tell it. But would you classify what was going on in that man's basement as ritualistic abuse? Was it ceremonial?
No, it wasn't. It was masochistic. It was about pain and fear. There was nothing that felt good, nothing confusing about it being torturous and leaving me with the fear that either I wasn't going to survive or that they were going to hurt my mom. And by then I had my little brother and sister who were teeny tiny little ones. But there were a lot of threats. I still have nightmares. I still have flashbacks. Those haven't gone away. But my nightmares, they're segmented. And for whatever reason, my nightmares are always in first person. So I'm completely reliving things. I never got the dissociation or floating in on above and watching things or anything like that, which I hear a lot. I just think it's odd for myself because I'm still trying to figure out why they have to be in first person. They happen in segments, and the segments are cut by being unconscious with them to being conscious until they make me unconscious again through pain or some of the other things they did. Each nightmare is, there's sometimes repeat things, but sometimes there are also new things that, like, I don't know how much is in that box because every once in a while something else new comes up as to what they did to me. I mean, I try to get my clients to be able to say, not exactly, but to describe things as they are, as they were. And I was raped. I was gang raped. And on top of that, the torturous stuff. And I don't know how many times they did it. I was suffocated. I was drowned multiple times. It's a lot. And I don't know that there's any one person that knows every single thing that I remember, at least so far. It's kind of split between friends. My friends know a lot. They know what I just said is the basic story to them, and then they get these other details that I don't really share unless people are really close to me, really, really close. That's the gist of it. Somehow, all of us survivors, we survived. It's not by doing something super spectacular. We just figured out a way to live. I was thinking about the movie Castaway yesterday and today, and just being on that island where I think it's common amongst survivors to feel like you're alone. It's only happening to you. It's only ever happened to you and to nobody else. Scrounging around like Tom Hanks, just looking for different supplies, different ways of coping, and trying to figure out a way to get off that island. That's what I can kind of picture being a survivor for myself to be, is I figured something out enough to survive. And with that, I had the support. I had support that I didn't even know of at the time. Looking back, I had a couple of teachers I could have went to. I know for a fact now that these coulda, woulda, shouldas, they were safe, but I was too scared. My coaches, my coaches set me up for having a better life despite what happened to me, just because of their care and support while I was on the mat, when I was in practice, when I did get to talk to them after practice. And that went up into high school. There's a couple of teachers, my wrestling coaches in high school. Without them, I don't think I would have survived. And they don't even know it, or they didn't know it at the time. I've tried to communicate with them that they really did save my life. Because of them, I ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps. It was like my first home, as dysfunctional as it was in boot camp. Everything actually made sense. And it was the hardest, funnest time in my whole life. I mean, hardest beyond the abuse, of course. But it was like I chose that. I chose to go through that. And I was a consenting adult in choosing to put myself through that kind of hell. Actually, recently, 2 days ago, I was texting with my senior drill instructor, who I found on Facebook. And every few years, I found him 10 years ago, and this is probably the third or fourth time I've contacted him, just chat for a little bit. I still haven't disclosed to him, but I want to. So the next time I contact him, because I'm very sentimental. And when someone's done something that I appreciate, that's really impacted me, I like to tell them, even if I met them when I was 4 years old. If I remember them and I remember something they did for me, it just means the world to me for them to know that I appreciate them in a way that might not be understandable to some people. I love the Marine Corps. I still love the Marine Corps. I had some difficult things happen in the Marine Corps, which it ended up with me being discharged for post-traumatic stress disorder. It just brought all of the abuse back. All my memories just flooded in. I was so overwhelmed. For 2 years after discharge, I tried working. I held jobs for a few months, or actually like a month, 2 months. There was one job I held for 8 months, maybe closer to a year. I'm not quite sure, is a blur. I lost my last job at that time. I lost my apartment 6 days later, which was also 6 days after my birthday. And I ended up being homeless for the next 2.5 years, because at that time, the VA, being a veteran, I was discharged for post-traumatic stress disorder, but there had to be paperwork to be done within the VA for them to award me any benefits. And at that time, it took years, when now for some it only takes months, a few months even. But back then it was years. So I had applied while I was still working, and I worked until I couldn't work anymore, and ended up homeless for 2.5 years here in Colorado. I was able to maintain some friendships. A little caveat. While I was homeless, I had started going to a church. I went to this church for years. I'll get back to the homeless part. But I was homeless pretty much when I started going there. Actually, I had an apartment while I started going there, and then I became homeless. Then I was there for like 10 years, something like that, only to realize at the end of that time it was an abusive relationship. Again, wanted to believe in God so bad that I was willing to just try and be anybody that they wanted me to be. But I couldn't pray enough because I wasn't getting healed. That was their explanation. I was always supposed to make myself available to other people, so that's me being used. I would volunteer all the time I had, and it wasn't very appreciated, to the point of people believing that I was there doing community service when I was just doing it. I was scrubbing toilets just because I knew how to scrub a toilet. With this church, it turned out that I had disclosed to the leadership, the pastors, and they came to a conclusion that I was a danger to kids because I was molested. And that angered me so much for them to classify me, put me in the same boat as my abusers. And that started a whole big fight over things. I was completely at war with them. I lost friendships over it. There were times when I had friends that were as close as can be and then disclosed, and all of a sudden they start acting weird about me being around their kids. At that church, it was like I was the only one that I knew of that had a background check. I mean, I don't even know if the staff had background checks. That's a little bit of it's a sore spot still. But I feel like that's still an extension of the abuse. For me, I mean, coming from a Catholic background, being abused by a priest on top of everything else, and them not understanding how hard it was for me or a person like me to turn around and say, yeah, I want to try this God again. And they shit on me. That's pretty literal to what they did to me. And that almost took me out, which is something I guess I should go into also, the whole ideation thing, suicidal ideation. I'll get back to that. Bouncing back, so I was homeless, waiting for the VA, which it wasn't a guaranteed thing. I had been out of the service for a couple years. I didn't have therapy. I didn't have any medication. I didn't know what post-traumatic stress was. I had no clue what was happening to me as I was homeless, and I came to the conclusion that that's how I was always going to be. That was going to be my life. That had started a series of suicide attempts. The VA finally came through at about the 2-year mark of that 2.5 years, and they gave me what was 10% back then. And that 10% back then was $102 a month that I was living on. And it sucked. Again, that's what I thought my life was going to be. I was like, I'm lucky to get $102 a month. Well, I'm out there on my own. That church, I never asked really for anything. I mean, I was eating out of their dumpster. I would help with their little cafe, and I'd be the one that would go ahead and throw the trash. And when I went out back, I'd pick through the trash. And I did that for those 2.5 years, give or take. Well, until I got that $102 a month, which paid for a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm okay. I'm just breathing.
Kevin, I want to interject something right here. And usually I say this much earlier, but I've been so enthralled and intrigued by your story. But I have to say how terribly sorry I am for you, for the experiences that you've had that have just devastated you, for the horrific, horrible things that you went through. But at the same time, I am so grateful for your willingness to share these and to put it out there for others who may be going through some of the same kind of thing, for that commonality, and to commend you for your strength and fortitude in doing what you're doing, because it's not easy. And anyone who's listening to this show that has been through rape or sexual assault knows that what you're doing is not easy. But I'm just really thankful for you, and at the same time, very sorry for what happened.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, my mind kind of goes back there every time I talk about it.
It does. That's the normality of the trauma.
Right.
We've talked about this on the show before with other guests who've said that it just doesn't feel very comfortable to talk about the terminology post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's not really a disorder. It's exactly what the body and brain and mind are designed to do, is protect yourself. And there's nothing that could be classified as a disorder in any of that. It's extremely complicated and difficult to maneuver through post-traumatic stress. And anybody that's been through a trauma has had post-traumatic stress. It's the longevity of the impact that classifies it professionally as a disorder, but it's truly not a disorder.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of thought that survivors, male survivors, female survivors, that should be a diagnosis more so than PTSD. But labels are whatever labels are, usually for insurance.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something about suicidal ideation. I think that's a common thing.
Right.
I've found it to be a common thing, even though I don't talk about it from my point of view with clients. I mean, I don't tell them, I don't know why I don't tell them that I have ideation myself. It kind of comes with the territory, I think, for a lot of us.
Yes.
And I've found that there are more people who deal with ideation than people want to admit or are comfortable even thinking about.
Right. That it's a lot more prevalent than most people realize.
Yeah, with trauma, with sexual trauma specifically, it is such a, I don't know, it seems like it's a given that that's like part of the package for a lot of us. But I've had multiple attempts. Probably something that saved me is kind of there's parts of it. There's part of fear of not wanting to disappoint my friends and honor their friendships for all they've done for me, all their care and genuineness and everything. And then there's a part where I couldn't deal with pain, so it could never be something that's painful. So a bullet to the head wouldn't help because I'd be that moment of pain. And so it was mostly medication or have been times where it was about like I deserve some type of pain because that's what I was made for. And it's weird how your mind plays tricks on you because it gets so dark. And the different stressors you might have, trying to use I statements, the different stressors I have had have brought about different ways of having ideation. It still scares me knowing how dark it gets.
Hey everyone, this is Dave, and I have an important announcement to make. This episode is particularly detailed and specific about the topics of suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or anyone you know are impacted and activated by the feelings and emotions being discussed on this episode and want to talk about what you're feeling, please do not hesitate to take advantage of calling the National Suicide Hotline at 988. Someone is always available to talk to you around the clock. You are not alone. If you need help, don't wait to call. Again, the number is 988.
It's hard to explain to someone who has never had any ideation. I mean, there's those people who are, I'd never do that. I'd never kill myself. No, no, no. And I'm like, you've just never been tested in that way to that extreme to where you think about it. I don't believe it's a choice so much. I differentiate between choice and a decision. And it seems more like a decision to me. And what I mean by that is thinking about 9/11. There were so many people on those upper floors that had to decide, am I going to burn to death? Am I going to be crushed by the building? Or am I going to jump? If you have a choice, that means that you have a choice of doing nothing. And with being a survivor, you can't choose to do nothing. You either have to push forward or you have to off yourself. That's kind of how it felt to me. And if pushing forward was too painful, that's kind of how my mind had worked with ideation, is there's only a decision to remain in pain or end the pain. And it wasn't like those people on 9/11, oh, I'll just take the elevator and leave the building. It doesn't work that way. I don't want to be offensive with that thought because I think it's horrible. Watching the TV when that happened, I thought about them, and then later on, years after, it's like they died and they didn't want to. They were forced into something. We were forced into being survivors, and we were forced into trying to figure out what the hell to do with our lives, with the shit that we've been through. It's not fair. It's not fucking fair.
Hey everyone, this is Dave, and I have an important announcement to make. This episode is particularly detailed and specific about the topics of suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or anyone you know are impacted and activated by the feelings and emotions being discussed on this episode and want to talk about what you're feeling, please do not hesitate to take advantage of calling the National Suicide Hotline at 988. Someone is always available to talk to you around the clock. You are not alone. If you need help, don't wait to call. Again, the number is 988.
What I do for myself and the way I talk about it with others, whether they have a sexual abuse history or not, they have ideation, is talking about their little guy, their inner child, and how innocent that's the complete and total innocent part of you. What did that innocent part of you do to deserve to die? And I have to think about that for myself. And as much pain as I have been throughout my years, at those times where it came down to, I got to do something to myself, it's not that I'm just doing something to myself, I'm doing something to my little guy. And being able to separate just enough to say that I don't mean to hurt myself. And I certainly don't mean to hurt this little part of me because he didn't do anything. And then you reflect that back to, I didn't do anything. We are the same being. He did his job in finding a way for us to survive. Now, as a grown man, trying to stay connected to that little part of me, I've become the person that would have protected him. I've become that person that is his inner voice. He's my inner child. I was his inner voice.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
It's one of the biggest reasons guys don't talk about it is because they don't know it's okay to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And it never feels like it's the right time.
Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Dave, and I have an important announcement to make. This episode is particularly detailed and specific about the topics of suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or anyone you know are impacted and activated by the feelings and emotions being discussed on this episode and want to talk about what you're feeling, please do not hesitate to take advantage of calling the National Suicide Hotline at 988. Someone is always available to talk to you around the clock. You are not alone. If you need help, don't wait to call. Again, the number is 988.
I guess I already talked about how I got to being where I am now, but it took, 10 plus years from the time I got discharged to being able to say, you know what, I'm going to try and go to school. In these last 10 years, getting more involved with, there's like this whole survivor community that's like people don't know of. I joke around a little bit. It's apparently 1 in 6 men. That's the whole statistic. So when I've talked to people, there's 6 people in your life, 6 men at least that you know of. They don't have to be your friends. They could be coworkers, whatever. You count to 6, there's a good chance that one of them's a survivor, and you can't tell them apart from the others. And when us survivors are in a public place, we might look around and say, yeah, there's 1 in 6 guys here, but you don't know who any of them are. And where I get with a little bit of a dark joke or whatever is we don't have a secret handshake. We don't wave our hands in a certain way that everybody else knows. We're all anonymous to each other, and that sucks. But me getting more involved in this kind of community, I've met so many amazing men, and to think all of us, and we're just a small sample of all the men in the US, all the men in the world. Every time I meet another survivor, it's life-changing for me. It's like there's another brother. I just met another brother. At least for me, I feel like we're connected in a way that, I don't know how to say it. We're just connected. There's something special about us in a good way. Not some perpetrator saying, yeah, you're special. It's that we are amazing men, and getting to the point of being able to tell yourself you're an amazing man is very hard. It was hard for me, and I still have trouble doing it. But we did things to survive. We figured out how to survive as kids. There are adults that can't figure out shit. And there are some of us who were, geez, raped, molested at like not even 1 years old. I mean, at all ages. And then we don't really even talk about men who are adults that get raped, or men who are adults and get raped by women, because that doesn't happen. It's impossible. There are so many guys who were raped, molested by women when they were kids, but it's looked at differently. It's so complex. It's overwhelming and it saddens me. But again, the men I've met, the men that I do actually call my brothers, I text them all the time. We call, some of them are older, like you.
Old guy.
And I'm like, hey, big brother, what's going on? Hey, big brother, just thinking about you. Or hey, little brother. I'll give a shout out to my little brother up in Washington State. But we are amazing men, and that's it's kind of summing it up to me, I think. It shouldn't have happened to any of us. As I've written, one of the things I came up with is our brotherhood has the absolute worst initiation ever, but it is a brotherhood. The relationships I have with other survivors are some of the deepest relationships you could have amongst other men.
They're priceless.
Yeah,
They're life-saving.
yeah. We need each other.
I'm stealing this from some ladies that I've interviewed that were on a panel together who talked about the sisterhood of women survivors. But the brotherhood of male survivors is not a brotherhood you would want anybody to have to be a part of. But,
Right.
but that you sure are thankful that the brotherhood is there for you
Exactly.
because of that initiation that you were forced into.
Yeah.
Kevin, what will you do when we stop talking in a few minutes to take care of yourself, to cope? What do you do on a daily basis? You see clients, you have intrusive nightmares and memories. Are you able to share with us what your coping skills and coping mechanisms are?
Well, I'm kind of dependent, to be honest. I found coping for me takes some external reaching out. I'll probably talk to a couple friends before bed. If I really feel, I don't know, get a wild hair, I'll go get me a milkshake and kind of treat the little kid in me, have a milkshake before bed.
Awesome. I love that.
But that's something I didn't talk about, but I call him my little guy instead of my inner child. But yeah, I reach out. That is one of my things. I'm not an introverted person, so maybe it's quite a bit easier for me to reach out. But I've found that to be a pattern throughout my life, is when I feel alone, I don't want to feel alone. So I reach out and find somebody. And that's how I've come across so many great friends. I still talk to my best friend from middle school. He's in Washington State also. And then my best friend from high school that introduced me to you. I have friends all over the US that I talk to. If I wake up super early from a nightmare, I try to get a hold of them, either just texting a little. I just woke up, I'm not feeling great, I'm still feeling scared, whatever. And they just text back something simple like, you're okay, or I'm still here, I'll check in on you later, something simple. And it's nice. I feel fortunate that I have friends across the US. So if it's early, like I said, then I could contact somebody on the East Coast. If it's getting later, contact one of my friends on the West Coast. And if it's an emergency, I got plenty of people to try and contact, not just virtually by phone, but having friends in the area. If I called in the middle of the night, they saw it, they certainly answer. And if they didn't answer, if I couldn't get a hold of anybody, me showing up on their doorstep would not be out of the norm, even though I I don't like to use that, but they know that something would be serious and they wouldn't turn me away. Like, why the hell are you waking me up or anything? I mean, so I think I want to say my coping, somehow it developed that I need people. And I wish that could be contagious because that alone feeling, that is one of the most painful feelings now for me. Not just here are these memories, here are these nightmares, but here are these memories, here are these nightmares, and I'm alone.
I just want to say that I'm really thankful that you do have people that you can reach out to remind you that you're not alone. And I can tell you that you have about 4,000 new people who know your story, and there are several who have started communities of communication with each other because of this show, and started their own communities in the places where they live to reach out to other victims and survivors. Then there are those guests who reach out to each other and share the commonality of survivorship and coping mechanisms and staying in touch. It's an honor to call you a friend as well as a member of the SAS family.
Just feel at times I was all over the place. Like you said, it's not scripted, so they don't know it now.
It's almost impossible to script trauma. And I learned this way before I started this podcast, but I knew when I went into this that I was never going to send a list of questions to people and say, let's just go down the list, because that's not how these experiences come to our mind, nor is it how they are processed in trauma brain.
Yeah.
It's interesting when I'm talking to someone educated like you about the way the brain works and how the mind works and how different the brain is, which is an organ, from the mind, which is a thought process. And you can't have one without the other, but the inner workings and the relationship between those two is so interesting when it comes to trauma, and how, I know trauma-wise and brain-wise and neurologically and memory-wise what's going on, but my mind and my emotions have a hard time processing what I know is fact.
Yeah, I was going to throw in there your brain, your mind, and there's your heart and the mix of emotions.
And the physical part of it,
Yeah.
because as Bessel van der Kolk says, and I've referenced this book multiple times, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
And we have physical reactions to our psychological and mental processes that can't be controlled by thinking. I'm not going to feel that way, or I'm not going to let my body feel a certain way. Well, we don't have that luxury of controlling that. Stomach aches happen, headaches happen, all kinds of somatic issues manifest from trauma. And so it's all encompassing.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating, Kevin. I'm really thankful you were so strong and willing to talk about this. Kevin, now that you've spent over an hour with me on telling your experience and your story, are you able to tell us how you feel about having exposed yourself to this opportunity of telling your story?
The feelings that come about, I still have an embarrassment feeling. It's not a rational embarrassment anymore. I feel really sad every time I tell my story. I feel sad for men who haven't had the opportunity, or who are still in that space where it's a secret. It's very easy for me to let myself cry right now. You might hear a little bit in my voice throughout this. I do have some control over that, but it's not an unhealthy thing in an unhealthy way. It's not like I'm gonna start crying as soon as I hang up.
Yeah.
Or it's like, what do you think I'm gonna do with my friends? I'm gonna sit on the phone and cry.
Mm-hmm.
It's a release, and it's one more step to not feeling like it's a secret. I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
All these men I've come across, they didn't do anything wrong. Even if something felt good for a little while, they weren't at a developmental stage for their bodies or their minds to understand what was going on. And then I think I barely mentioned adult men. That's like a whole second stage of what could come out of male survivors from childhood sexual abuse coming forward. Because there's men out there that have been assaulted. It just seems like, and to me, it's a whole other avenue of things that haven't been addressed yet. As men who are molested as boys, we're already kind of behind, an afterthought in a lot of ways. I've met too many professionals that have never been trained to work with men specifically. The idea that I've seen come across is they get trained for trauma, for working with trauma, and it's like all trauma is the same. There's some basic things that are similar, but then it sprouts off. And with sexual trauma, when they get trained, and from what I've experienced with those type of trainings, is it's set up to address females, women who were molested as girls. And the idea that you change the pronouns to male and that everything sticks. And as many similarities that there might be, or that there are some similarities between men and women being raped. However, these different terms of violations, that it's not as simple as just changing pronouns.
Not at all.
And it's not like it's worse for a man versus a woman. It's different. Women deal with a whole different type of victim blaming a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's, what was she wearing? Was she drinking? Something like that.
Yeah.
And that might keep women from coming forward. It has before. Even though, what was she wearing, when she's like a 10-year-old girl and somebody says, well, they came onto him. That's victim blaming. But on the men's side, it's stuff more like there's the fear of coming forward because you might be a perpetrator. That's how people might see you. I experienced that.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. I tell people it only takes one accusation and all of a sudden you're put in the same boat as the people that hurt you.
Yeah.
And I'm becoming more and more of a believer that men who were abused as boys, the ones who actually talk about things or try to tell their story, that they're not the ones that should be looked at as a threat. This is personal stuff. I don't personally believe that offending survivors would talk about their abuse, but I hope it makes sense.
It does.
And that's just me. It's out of an observation that it's hard enough to tell your story. And if somebody comes to you and discloses, it's not, oh no, let me hide my kids from my friend who disclosed. It's more like, I'm sorry this happened to you. That might be the guy that protects your kids like nobody else.
Yep. That's so important to point that out. I'm really glad you said that. There's so much truth in that. You've done a great job on so many levels, Kevin. This has been an amazing opportunity for me. And I'm so thankful that you took the time to sit down with me and mustered up that courage and that strength to tell your experience, to tell your story. And I do look forward to the possibility of doing this again, because I think there's so much more we could talk about, if you're willing.
Okay.
Great.
Is it okay to cry?
It's always okay to cry.
Right.
Yeah. Take care.
Hey, good night, Dave.
Good night, Kevin. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. There isn't a way to express my absolute awe and gratitude to Kevin Taylor for being my guest this week. His determination, grit, and strength are truly what this show is all about, and I can't thank you enough, Kevin. I'm profoundly thankful for your example and fortitude. Keep doing what you're doing. To all of you who've joined us for this episode, thank you for being here. I hope that you will take just a quick second to rate this show and subscribe to SAS. Every new subscriber and positive rating helps promote this show to others, and in turn helps bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Thank you for your support. It would also be extremely appreciated if you would go to the new Sexual Assault Survivor Stories page on Instagram and click that follow button. Being a follower also helps further the mission and goals of SAS and provides the opportunity for more people to have access to the site and to this show. Thank you in advance for following. I look forward to being with you again next Tuesday as I bring you another amazing guest. In the meantime, don't forget to start by believing whenever you encounter a victim or survivor who is reaching out for support in telling their rape or sexual assault experience, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.